The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that split the afternoon silence. $7! Just like that, Amanda Moore owned 80 acres of land nobody else wanted. She stood in a room that smelled like dust and old wood, 18 years old, with $12 left in her pocket, staring at a set of rusted keys that looked like they might crumble in her hand. The 6 people in folding chairs turned to look at her with expressions she recognized from a lifetime of being looked at: amusement, curiosity, the particular kind of pity reserved for children who don't know any better. If you had $12 left in the world and someone offered you 80 acres for 7, would you take it? Most people would walk away. Amanda Moore didn't. And what she found in that frozen ground changed everything. But the story doesn't make sense unless you understand where she came from, unless you understand what it means to have nothing, to be nothing, to belong to no one. She remembered the taste of that last morning at St. Augustine's Home for Children in Lincoln, Nebraska. Instant oatmeal gone cold, powdered milk mixed too thin, the same breakfast she'd eaten for as long as she could remember at the same scratched table by the window. But that Tuesday in March was different. She was 16 years old in the foster system, and 16 is a cliff. Too old to be adopted, too young to matter. The state would keep a file on her for 2 more years, but the chances of anyone taking her home had dropped to almost zero the day she turned 13. Mrs. Callahan found her after breakfast. She was a tired woman with tired eyes and a tired smile, and she'd been running St. Augustine's for 22 years. Amanda didn't think she was unkind. She was just worn down by too many kids and not enough miracles. Her voice had that particular softness that meant bad news. The walk to the office took them past the bulletin board with its faded posters about hygiene and homework, past the door to the rec room where a television played shows nobody watched, past the window that looked out on a parking lot where social workers came and went, taking some kids and leaving others. Amanda was always one of the others. Mrs. Callahan handed her a manila envelope and a small cardboard box. "These are your mother's effects. We've held them in storage since you arrived. You're old enough now to have them." Amanda stared at the box. It was small enough to hold in one hand. 12 years in this place, and this was all that remained of the woman who'd given birth to her. "What about my file? Is there anything else about my family?" Mrs. Callahan shook her head. "Your mother died in a car accident when you were 4. No father listed on the birth certificate. No known relatives. I'm sorry, Amanda. There's nothing else." She gave Amanda $175 in an envelope. State allowance. Enough to last maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. Good luck. That was it. That was goodbye. 16 years old, and the system was done with her. Amanda opened the box that night in a bus station in Lincoln. She'd bought a ticket to nowhere in particular, just the cheapest route heading west, because west felt like possibility. Inside the box, she found 3 things: a silver ring tarnished almost black with the initials carved into the inside, KW plus DH, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be her birth certificate. Mother Catherine Wright, father unknown, place of birth Billings, Montana, and a photograph. It was a Polaroid, faded and soft around the edges. A woman stood in front of a farmhouse, one hand shading her eyes from the sun. She was young, maybe 17, and she was smiling in a way that looked almost defiant, like she was daring the camera to capture something she wasn't ready to give. Behind her, the farmhouse rose white against a blue sky. A porch wrapped around the front. A barn sat in the distance. And all around, fields stretched to a horizon that seemed to go on forever. On the back, someone had written in careful cursive, "Mama's Place, Briarwood, Montana, 1987." Amanda turned the photograph over and looked at the woman again. At her mother, she had her eyes, dark brown, almost black in certain light. She had her chin, too, that stubborn jut that Mrs. Callahan used to call her difficult face. But she didn't have her smile. She didn't have her ease in front of the camera. She didn't have whatever it was that let someone stand in the sun and look at the world like it owed them something good. She had nothing. Except now she had a place, a name, Briarwood, Montana. And that was enough to keep moving. The next 2 years are hard to talk about, not because they were especially cruel. Amanda had heard worse stories from other kids who aged out of the system, girls who ended up on the streets, boys who ended up in prison. She was luckier than most, but luck isn't the same as easy, and those 2 years taught her things she wished she didn't know. She worked. That was the simple version. She washed dishes in a diner outside Cheyenne until the owner's son cornered her in the storage room, and she had to leave fast. She picked apples in an orchard near Bozeman until the season ended and they didn't need her anymore. She cleaned motel rooms in a town so small it didn't have a name on the map. She slept in bus stations when she could afford the ticket somewhere. She slept in shelters when they had room. She slept behind a laundromat one November, curled against the warm vent, and woke up with frost in her hair. She was always moving, always looking, because every library she passed, she stopped. Every computer with internet access, she searched. Briarwood, Montana, Anderson, Wright, any combination of words she could think of. For 18 months, she found nothing. And then, in the public library in Billings, Montana, she found everything. The records were in the county clerk's archive, digitized but buried in a database nobody ever looked at. Property records, tax documents, the bones of a place called Briarwood. She learned that Briarwood had once been a real town, 300 people at its peak back in the 1940s, a feed store, a church, a school, farms spreading out in all directions following the river until it dried up every summer. Now the population was listed as 80. Most of the young people had left. The school had closed in 1998. The church held services once a month when the circuit preacher made his rounds, but the property records still existed. And in those records, she found her. Margaret Anderson, 80 acres, Section 12, Township 4 North. Primary residence, 1 farmhouse, 1 barn, various outbuildings. Property acquired 1952. Margaret Anderson had been Amanda's great-grandmother. She'd owned the farm in that photograph. She'd lived there for 60 years. And according to the county records, she died in 2012, 6 years before Amanda started searching. Amanda sat at that library computer for a long time staring at the screen. She'd had family, real family, someone who might have known her mother, someone who might have known her, but she was gone now, and the farm was listed as abandoned, property taxes unpaid, estimated debt $6,200, and at the bottom of the record a notice. Property scheduled for county auction. Date March 15th. Minimum bid $5. Amanda looked at the calendar in the corner of the screen. It was March 12th. She hitched a ride with a farmer hauling feed to a ranch outside Briarwood. He was a quiet man named Earl who didn't ask questions, which she appreciated. He let her out at the intersection of two dirt roads and pointed toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. Town's that way. What's left of it? Briarwood looked like a place that was slowly forgetting it existed. The main street had 6 buildings, and 3 of them were boarded up. A feed store anchored one end, its sign faded but still legible. A diner sat at the other end, smoke rising from a chimney. In between a hardware store, a church, and 2 empty storefronts staring at each other across cracked pavement. Amanda found the county clerk's office in a building that also served as the post office and the library. A woman named Doris took her questions without much interest. Auctions tomorrow at 10. Courthouse. You planning to bid maybe? Doris looked her over. 18 years old, dirty backpack clothes that had seen too many laundromat dryers. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. That Anderson place has been empty 6 years. Roof's half gone, pipes froze and burst. Nobody's touched it since the old woman died. I know. It'll take more than $5 to make it livable. I know that too. Doris shrugged. Your funeral. She didn't know how right she was. The auction took place in a room that smelled like dust and old wood. 6 people sat in folding chairs, all of them old enough to be her grandparents. A man in a rumpled suit read from a clipboard, his voice flat and bored. There were 4 properties on the list: an empty lot, a burned-out gas station, 30 acres of scrubland nobody wanted, and the Anderson farm. The first 3 sold fast. $100 here, $50 there. The men in the folding chairs bid without enthusiasm, like they were buying expired groceries out of habit. Then the clerk got to the last item. Anderson property, 80 acres, section 12, farmhouse, barn outbuildings. Condition as is, minimum bid $5. He looked up. Nobody moved. The clock on the wall ticked. A fly buzzed against the window. The clerk cleared his throat. $5. Anyone. Amanda raised her hand. 7. A few people turned to look at her. She saw amusement in their eyes, curiosity, the kind of pity reserved for children who don't know any better. $7. Do I hear? 8. Silence. Going once. He sounded almost surprised. Going twice. The gavel came down. So Amanda walked to the front of the room and signed her name on a piece of paper. Her hand was shaking, but her signature was clear. Amanda Moore. The clerk handed her a receipt and a set of keys, so rusted they looked like they might crumble in her hand. Congratulations. You've got 90 days to pay $1,500 in back taxes, otherwise the county takes it back. Amanda nodded. 90 days. $1,500. She had $40 left. No job, no skills, no one who cared whether she lived or died. But she had something she'd never had before. She had land. She had a name. She had a place where someone in her family had once stood in the sun and smiled. For the first time in her life, she belonged somewhere. The walk to the farm took 2 hours. The road turned from pavement to gravel to dirt winding through fields that had gone wild with neglect. Brown grass waved in the wind like an ocean. The sky stretched overhead, bigger than any sky she'd seen in her life. She'd grown up in cities, in institutions, in places where the horizon was always blocked by buildings or fences or walls. Here there was nothing between her and the edge of the world. It should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt terrifying. Because the closer she got to the farm, the more she understood what she'd bought. The house appeared first rising from the prairie like something that had grown there by accident, and nobody had bothered to remove. White paint peeled from the clapboards in long curls. The porch sagged on the left side, one post completely gone. 3 windows on the upper floor were dark holes where glass should have been. The roof was the worst. A corner of it had collapsed entirely, leaving a jagged wound that exposed the attic to the sky. Even from a distance, she could see stains where rain had poured in and rotted everything it touched. Behind the house, a barn leaned at an angle that seemed to defy gravity. It looked like someone had propped it against the wind and walked away. And everywhere, the grass had taken over, chest high in places, covering what might have been a garden, swallowing what might have been a path, reclaiming what people had tried to build. The locals called it the coffin. Amanda stood at the edge of the property for a long time. The wind pushed against her back like a hand trying to guide her forward or warn her away. She thought about turning around. She could sell the keys to someone, walk back to town, keep moving the way she'd been moving for 2 years, find another diner, another orchard, another laundromat vent to sleep against. But she'd tried that life already, and she knew where it led. Nowhere. It led nowhere. She took a breath and walked toward the house. The front door was unlocked. It wasn't even closed all the way. The frame had warped so badly that the door sat at an angle, leaving a gap wide enough for animals to pass through, and they had. The smell hit her first. Mold, rot, mouse droppings, the particular sweet-sour stench of abandonment. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room might have been beautiful once. High ceilings, a stone fireplace, windows that would have let in light on 3 sides. Now plaster hung from the ceiling in long sheets. The floor was soft and treacherous with water damage. A family of something had built a nest in the corner, leaving debris scattered across what remained of a rug. Amanda moved through the room slowly, testing each step before she trusted her weight. Kitchen counter's crumbled sink hanging loose from the wall. Bedroom mattress reduced to springs and mold. Bathroom better not to describe. But the bones were there. She could see them under the damage. Solid walls, strong beams, a foundation that had held for 70 years. The bones are good. She said it out loud just to hear something besides the wind. Her voice sounded small, hopeful, stupid. She kept exploring. In what had been a back room, she found the first sign that someone had lived here. Really lived here, not just existed. A bookshelf still standing with books still on it. A rocking chair by the window, its cushion chewed, but its frame intact. A basket of yarn, the colors faded, but recognizable. And on the wall, photographs. Amanda approached them carefully, afraid they might crumble at her touch. They were old, black and white some of them. A man in overalls standing next to a tractor. A woman in a flower dress holding a baby. 2 children running toward the camera, their mouths open in laughter, and one photograph in a silver frame placed at the center of the wall. A young woman standing in front of this house, one hand shading her eyes from the sun. Her mother. Amanda reached out and touched the glass. It was cool under her fingers. Real. Catherine had stood in this room. She had looked at this photograph. She had been here. Amanda sank down onto the floor and cried. That night she slept in the truck. It was a 1987 Chevrolet pickup, rusted and dusty, but somehow still whole, parked in what had once been a garage behind the house. The keys were in the ignition. When she turned them, the engine coughed twice and died, but the cab was dry. The seats were cracked, but not moldy. And when she curled up with her jacket as a blanket and her backpack as a pillow, it felt more like safety than anything she'd known in years. The cold woke her before dawn. December in Montana is not kind to people sleeping in dead trucks. Her breath came out in clouds. Her fingers were stiff and clumsy. When she finally got the door open and stepped outside, the frost crunched under her boots like broken glass. But the sky! She had never seen a sky like that, pink and orange and gold spreading from the horizon like fire. The field stretched out around her silver with frost, and for a moment she forgot the cold. She forgot the damage. She forgot the $1,500 she didn't have and the 90 days she couldn't waste. She just stood there and watched the sun rise on her land, my land. The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign, like a language she was only beginning to learn, but she practiced it anyway. Standing there in the frozen grass, her breath rising like smoke, she said it out loud, "My land." She went back to the house as soon as there was enough light to see. She needed to understand what she was dealing with, how bad the damage really was, what could be saved and what couldn't, and she needed to find the hatch. The night before, huddled in the truck, she had read through the papers she'd found in her mother's things, her birth certificate, a few receipts, and a folded letter so old the creases had almost worn through, written in handwriting she didn't recognize. "My dearest Catherine, I don't know if you will ever come back. I pray every day that you will. But if you don't, I want you to know that I forgive you. I've always forgiven you. Whatever happened that night, whatever made you run, it doesn't matter. You are my granddaughter. You are my blood, and I love you. If you ever do come home, look under the barn, your grandfather's hiding place. He built it during the war when he thought the world might end. I've kept it up. Everything you need to start over is there. Come home, Catherine. Please come home. All my love, Grandma Margaret." The letter wasn't dated, but it had been in Catherine's things when she died, which meant she'd kept it for years, carried it with her, never thrown it away. Maybe she'd meant to come back. Maybe she'd tried and couldn't. Maybe she'd spent her whole short life planning to return to this place and never found the courage. Amanda would never know, but she could find the hiding place. She could see what Margaret had left behind. The barn was worse than the house. The main structure leaned so far to the east that she was afraid to breathe near it. Half the roof had fallen in, creating a mountain of debris that blocked most of the interior. The smell of rotting hay and animal waste made her eyes water, but the floor was still there. Wooden planks warped and filthy, but solid when she tested them. She started in the corner, furthest from the collapsed section, feeling along the edges of each plank, looking for a seam, a hinge, anything that suggested a door. It took her 2 hours. The hatch was in the second stall, hidden under a layer of dirt and hay, so thick it looked like part of the floor. She found it by accident when her boot caught on a metal ring she thought was a piece of broken equipment. She pulled. The door was heavy. Her arms burned with the effort, but slowly, inch by inch, it came up. Beneath it, wooden stairs descended into darkness. She used her phone for light. The battery was almost dead, but she didn't care. She had to see. The room below was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were lined with supplies. Canned food, some of it probably still good. Tools wrapped in oiled cloth. Seeds in sealed jars. A lantern. Matches. A first aid kit. And on a small table against the far wall, a metal box. Amanda opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside, she found $1,100 in cash, mostly 20s and 10s, bundled with rubber bands that crumbled when she touched them. She found a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. She found letters, 47 letters, each one in its own envelope, each one addressed to Catherine Wright, each one stamped "Return to Sender." And beneath the letters, tied with a faded ribbon, 8 birthday cards. Imagine spending 12 years writing birthday cards to a granddaughter you've never met. 12 years of hope. 12 years of waiting. And she died 11 days after writing the last one. Amanda had come 6 years too late. Amanda opened the first card. The paper was pink with hand-drawn flowers along the edges. Inside, in careful cursive, "Happy 5th birthday, my dearest Amanda. I don't know where you are. I don't know if you'll ever read this. But I made you a card anyway, because somewhere in the world you're turning 5 today. And I want you to know that someone is thinking of you, your great-grandmother Margaret." She opened the next one, and the next. Year after year of birthday wishes for a child she'd never met, each one addressed to Amanda because she'd found her name somehow, each one filled with small updates about the farm, about the weather, about the cat she'd adopted and named Hope. The last card was dated just 3 months before Margaret died. Amanda's 12th birthday. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. "Happy 12th birthday, Amanda. You're growing up now. I've left everything for you. The money, the letters, the land. It's all waiting. Please come home. I don't have much time left. I love you. I've always loved you. Grandma Margaret." She died 11 days after writing those words. She'd held on as long as she could, but Amanda hadn't come in time. Amanda pressed the card to her chest and cried until she couldn't breathe. She used $600 to pay the first installment on the back taxes. That left her $500 to survive on, $500 to last through winter in a house with holes in the roof and no heat and plumbing that had frozen and burst years ago. The woman at the county office looked at her like she'd lost her mind when she handed over the cash. "You're actually staying." Her name was Doris, and she'd been clerk for 30 years. She'd seen plenty of people buy abandoned property. None of them lasted. "I'm staying. Winter comes early here, November, sometimes October. Gets down to 20 below. You don't have heat." "I know. You don't have water. I know that too." Doris shook her head, but she took the money and stamped the receipt. "Your funeral." It was becoming a theme. Amanda started with the roof, not because she knew what she was doing, but because rain was coming. She could smell it in the air, that particular metallic tang that meant storms. If she didn't cover the holes, everything inside would be destroyed. She had no money for materials, so she did what she'd learned to do in her years of surviving. She found things nobody else wanted. The feed store at the end of Main Street was run by a woman named Ruth Carter. She was 71 years old, with white hair cropped short and hands rough as tree bark. She'd owned the store for 40 years since her husband died and left her with 3 kids and a mortgage. She watched Amanda come in 3 days in a row. Each time Amanda walked the aisles looking at supplies she couldn't afford. Tarps, nails, rope, the basic tools of survival. On the 4th day, Ruth spoke. "You're the girl who bought the Anderson place." "Yes, ma'am. You knew Margaret Anderson. She was my great-grandmother." Ruth studied her for a long moment. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and they missed nothing. "You look like her. Around the jaw. That stubborn set." Amanda didn't know what to say to that. "I knew Margaret. We were friends for 60 years. She used to come in here every Thursday, buy her supplies, stay to talk. When she got too sick to drive, I brought things out to her. Ruth paused. She talked about Catherine all the time, her granddaughter, the one who left. She never stopped believing Catherine would come back. Catherine was my mother. She died when I was 4. Something shifted in Ruth's face. Not pity exactly, something harder and softer at the same time. Margaret never knew. She would have moved heaven and earth if she'd known. She would have found you. I know. Amanda had read the letters. She knew exactly how hard Margaret had searched. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a scrap of paper. I've got some damaged inventory in back, tarps with small holes, nails that got wet and rusted. Not worth selling, but still usable if you don't mind the imperfections. I can't pay much. Ruth's voice was gruff. I wasn't asking for money. Amanda felt something loosen in her chest. The first kindness she'd been offered in longer than she could remember. Yes, I could use it. That was how she met Christopher Miller. He worked for Ruth part-time, she said, but he was there every day Amanda came in. He was 23 with dark hair and darker eyes and a face that didn't give much away. When he spoke, which wasn't often, his voice was low and deliberate. The first time Amanda saw him, he was hauling bags of feed from a delivery truck. He looked at her once, nodded, and went back to work. The second time, she was struggling to load damaged tarps into the back of Margaret's old truck. She'd gotten the engine running by then, mostly through stubbornness and a YouTube video about carburetors, but her arms weren't strong enough to lift the heavy rolls of plastic. Christopher appeared beside her without a word. He grabbed one end of the tarp, waited for her to grab the other, and helped her load it into the truck. Thanks, he nodded. That was their entire conversation. But over the weeks that followed, he started showing up at the farm. Not to talk, just to work. He'd arrive in the morning, spend a few hours helping her patch the roof or reinforce the walls, and leave before dark. When she asked why, he shrugged. Ruth sent me. Later, after about the 10th time she asked, he said more. Your great-grandmother helped my mother once. She was a midwife, delivered me when the roads were too icy to get to a hospital. My mother would have died without her. He looked at the house, at the patches they'd made, at the work still left to do. Debts don't go away just because people die. The third person who helped her was Linda Taylor. She was 52 years old, a widow who ran the only diner in Briarwood. It wasn't much. 6 booths, a counter with stools, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since 1985. But it was warm, and the coffee was hot, and the food was honest. Linda hired Amanda to wash dishes 3 nights a week. Minimum wage, cash, no questions asked. Margaret used to come here every Sunday after church. Same booth every time. Same order, coffee, apple pie, and whatever gossip she'd collected during the week. Linda smiled at the memory. She talked about Catherine all the time, her granddaughter who left. She'd show me pictures, tell me stories. She was so sure Catherine would come back someday. Linda looked at Amanda. I guess she was right, just not the way she expected. Amanda worked at that diner for 3 months, scrubbing pots until her hands cracked, mopping floors until her back ached, eating whatever Linda couldn't sell, which was sometimes the only food she had. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. By November, she had a roof that didn't leak, mostly. She had walls that blocked the worst of the wind. She had a wood stove she'd salvaged from a barn 20 miles away, its chimney pipe held together with wire and prayer. She had learned to chop wood, though her blisters had blisters. She had learned to read the sky, to know when storms were coming by the way the clouds stacked on the horizon. She had learned to bank a fire so it would last through the night. She stood under the oak tree Margaret had planted and looked at what she'd built. The house still rough, still patched, but standing, the light in the window burning steady through the dark. And, for the first time in 18 years, Amanda Moore wasn't running anymore. November came hard, and with it, her first real enemy. The progress felt fragile. She had a roof that mostly held back rain, walls that blocked the worst wind, a wood stove rescued from an abandoned barn, its chimney pipe a patchwork of mismatched sections bound together with wire she'd scavenged. She learned to split wood by watching her hands blister, then callous, then blister again. She learned to read weather by the way light bent through clouds, stacking on the western horizon. She learned that keeping a fire alive through the night meant more than just adding logs. It meant understanding how wood breathed, how air moved, how heat wanted to escape. But understanding didn't make the cold less cruel. He came on a morning when frost painted the inside of the windows. Amanda was wearing every piece of clothing she owned, 3 shirts layered under her jacket, 2 pairs of socks, inside boots held together with duct tape. She was outside splitting wood when the truck appeared, new, clean, so out of place on the rutted dirt road that she knew immediately this wasn't someone passing through. The man who stepped out wore boots that had never seen mud. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Moore, I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood. Thank you. I also wanted to make you an offer." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. $3,000 for the property. As is. You can be gone by the end of the week. Amanda looked at the paper, but didn't take it. The property isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, sweetheart. It's just a matter of price. His smile widened, and she saw what was underneath it. Something calculating, something patient. "You're young. You don't understand how things work out here. This land is isolated, hard to access, expensive to maintain. You'll burn through whatever money you have by spring. And then what? Then I'll figure something out, like my great-grandmother did." The smile vanished, like a light switched off. Margaret was a stubborn old woman, refused every offer I made, sat out here alone for years watching her farm fall apart around her. "Is that what you want?" Amanda met his eyes. They were pale gray like ice over deep water. "Margaret kept this land in my family for 60 years. I intend to do the same." His jaw tightened. "You have 90 days to pay the back taxes. If you miss the deadline, the county takes the land and I'll be there to buy it. Then I'd better not miss the deadline." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. Over his shoulder, his voice carried across the frozen yard. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing. Stubborn just like her. We'll see how that works out for you." Amanda didn't know his name until Ruth told her that afternoon. Richard Walker owned the largest ranch in the county. 2,000 acres spread across both sides of the river, raised cattle and grew wheat and employed half the town, which meant everyone owed him something. He'd been trying to buy Margaret's land for 30 years. Ruth's hands stilled on the invoice she was writing. Margaret always said no, every single time. Even when things got hard, even when she was alone, even when she didn't have money to fix things. She said this land was her husband's legacy, her daughter's birthright. She'd die before she let Richard Walker have it, and she did. December turned the world to ice. The temperature dropped to 20 below. The wind howled through every crack Amanda hadn't found yet. She woke one morning to find frost on the inside of her blankets, but she kept working. Christopher came when the weather allowed, teaching her how to read the grain of wood before cutting it, how to square corners, how to make repairs that would last. He'd studied construction for 2 years at a community college in Billings before coming home to help his mother when she got sick. He knew the land better than anyone could predict. Weather changes, hours before they happened, could find shelter in places that looked like empty wilderness. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it changed his whole face. The accident happened on a Thursday. They were in the barn working to reinforce a beam that held up what remained of the loft. The structure was more unstable than they'd realized. Christopher was halfway up a ladder when Amanda heard it. That particular sound of wood giving way. Not a crack, more like a sigh, like the barn had been holding its breath for years and finally let go. The beam split. The section of loft floor above them tilted. Christopher's shout cut through the cold air as he dove sideways, pushing her clear. She hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively. Behind her, timber crashed down. 2x4s and planks and decades of accumulated debris. And Christopher. She didn't remember screaming, didn't remember scrambling through the wreckage, just remembered his face gray with pain as she tried to dig him out from under a beam that had caught his shoulder and had driven him into the frozen earth. The doctor at the clinic said he'd been lucky. Dislocated shoulder, 2 ribs cracked. He'd be okay. But he needed rest. Weeks of rest. Ruth came to the clinic. She didn't yell. That was almost worse. Her voice was flat. Empty. I told you that place would kill someone. I told you and you didn't listen. Ruth, I'm sorry. Don't. Ruth held up her hand and Amanda saw something in her eyes she'd never seen before. Blame Christopher is my responsibility. I shouldn't have let him go out there. That's on me. Ruth's voice cracked. Stay away from him. Stay away from both of us. She left. Christopher was transferred to his mother's house in the next county. He texted once, I'm okay. Don't worry. I'll be back when I can. But when he could, wasn't now. And now was all Amanda had. That same week, Richard Walker bought the building that housed Linda's diner, doubled the rent overnight. Linda couldn't pay. She found Amanda in the kitchen, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, honey. I can't afford to keep you on. I can barely afford to keep the lights on. The diner closed 2 weeks later. Linda moved to Billings to live with her sister. Amanda lost Christopher, lost Ruth, lost Linda, lost her job. She had 20 days until the tax deadline, $500, and a wood stove that was running out of fuel. She thought about Richard Walker's offer, $3,000, enough to start over somewhere easier, somewhere the wind didn't cut through walls like they weren't there, somewhere she didn't have to fight for every breath. But she was tired of running, tired of having nothing, tired of belonging to no one. This land might kill her, but at least she'd die on ground that was hers. Christmas Eve came with a temperature of 30 below. The forecast called for a blizzard, the kind that closed roads and buried houses and killed anyone caught outside unprepared. Amanda sat by the wood stove, feeding it carefully, rationing the logs she'd spent weeks collecting. The cold crept in anyway, finding every gap, every weakness, every place where her repairs weren't good enough. The wind screamed against the walls. Snow drove against the windows like fists. She could leave, pack her bag, hike to the main road before the storm got worse, catch a ride to somewhere with heat and running water, and a future that didn't look like slow starvation. She'd done it before, survived on the margins, moved when things got hard, but something kept her in that chair, something deeper than stubbornness. She was tired of running, tired of having nothing, being nothing, belonging to no one. She had 80 acres of frozen ground and a house that was barely standing and a deadline she probably couldn't meet. But it was hers, the first thing that had ever been hers. The lights appeared around midnight. At first she thought she was imagining things. No one drove in weather like this. But the headlights kept coming, weaving erratically on the road toward her property. Then they stopped, right where the road dipped into a gully that filled with snow every winter. They were stuck. Amanda put on every layer she owned, wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed, grabbed the lantern, stepped out into the storm. The cold was a physical blow. She couldn't feel her face within seconds. Her eyes watered and froze. Every breath was a knife in her lungs. But she kept moving. The car was a Honda Civic, completely wrong for this weather. It had slid off the road into the ditch, its rear wheels spinning uselessly against ice. Inside, she could see shapes. People. She banged on the window. A woman's face appeared. Dark hair, dark eyes. Terrified. The door opened. "My children, please, my children." In the back seat, two kids huddled together under a blanket. A boy, maybe 9, a girl younger, maybe 6. The girl wasn't moving. Amanda didn't remember carrying her to the house, just remembered the weight in her arms, light as a bird, remembered the blue tinge to her lips, remembered the mother stumbling behind her, dragging the boy, sobbing into the wind, remembered getting them inside and closing the door against the storm. And then everything became very simple. The girl was hypothermic. Amanda had read about it in Margaret's journal in the sections where she wrote about her years as a midwife, about babies born in blizzards, farmers who fell through ice, travelers who got lost in storms. Body temperature drops, heart slows, the body shuts down piece by piece, trying to preserve the core. You couldn't warm them too fast. That was the thing. Too fast, and the cold blood rushed to the heart and stopped it completely. You had to be slow, careful, patient. Amanda wrapped the girl in blankets, put her near the stove, but not too close, gave the mother dry clothes and hot water, and told her to hold her daughter skin to skin, sharing body heat the way mammals had done for millions of years. And she waited. The night lasted forever. Amanda kept the fire burning, heated water, made broth, forced the mother to drink even though her hands shook too hard to hold the cup. The boy sat in the corner, silent, watching everything with eyes that had seen too much. The storm raged. The girl didn't move. And then, around 4 in the morning, she cried. It was a weak sound, a whimper really, but her mother heard it and started crying too, clutching her daughter so tight Amanda was afraid she'd stop breathing all over again. "She's okay. She's going to be okay." The mother looked at her. "You saved her. You saved my daughter." Amanda didn't know what to say to that, so she just kept feeding the fire. Have you ever helped someone who ended up changing your life? Because what happened that night didn't just save 3 people, it saved Amanda too. The mother's name was Sharon Lewis. She was 36 years old, trying to get to a new job in a new town where no one knew her name. Her children were Michael 9 and Emily 5. They'd been running from something. Amanda recognized the look. She'd worn it herself for 2 years. Sharon and her children stayed with Amanda that winter. At first it was practical. The car was destroyed. The roads were closed. Sharon had $200 and nowhere to go. But even after the roads cleared, even after Amanda offered to drive her to the bus station in Billings, Sharon hesitated. She stood at the window watching Michael and Emily play in the snow. They'd recovered faster than Amanda would have thought possible. Where would we go? The job I was heading to isn't going to wait. I'd have to start over again. Find another place that'll take a woman with 2 kids and no references. Sharon turned to look at her. How much help do you need around here? Amanda laughed. It came out harsher than she meant. More than I can afford. I wasn't asking about money. The arrangement they worked out was simple. Sharon had skills Amanda didn't. She'd worked as a bookkeeper before everything went wrong. She knew how to budget, how to plan, how to stretch a dollar further than it should go. Amanda had land, space, a place where 3 people could sleep without paying rent. Together, they had a chance. Sharon took over the finances, figured out which taxes could be deferred, which bills could be negotiated, which small jobs around town might hire a mother who could only work while her kids were in school. Amanda kept working on the house, patching, building, fixing. Her hands developed calluses on top of calluses. Her shoulders ached constantly. But every day the place looked a little less like a ruin and a little more like a home. Michael helped when he could, serious and quiet with his mother's dark eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded Amanda of herself. He learned to stack firewood, check the water barrels, feed the chickens they got from a neighbor who was downsizing. Emily followed Amanda everywhere. Fearless at 5 years old, she asked questions constantly. Why does wood burn? Why does water freeze? Why do you live out here alone? I'm not alone. I have you. Emily smiled, like Amanda had given her the best gift in the world. Spring came slowly. The snow melted in patches, revealing mud and dead grass and the bones of what the farm might become. Amanda walked the property on the first warm day. Really walked it. Seen it with new eyes. 80 acres, more land than she could comprehend. Fields that had once grown wheat and oats and vegetables. A pasture that had held horses. An orchard of apple trees, most of them dead now, but a few still showing signs of life. And the house. Their house. Still rough, still patched, but standing. She stood in the middle of what had been a garden and laughed out loud. Emily came running to see what was funny. We did it. We survived. Emily didn't understand why that mattered. She was 5. She didn't know how close they'd come, how many nights Amanda had lain awake, calculating days and dollars and chances. But Sharon understood. She came out to stand beside Amanda, her hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Now comes the hard part. She was right. Ruth came back 2 weeks after the accident. She stood at the door with a casserole dish in her hands and tears in her eyes. I heard what you did. Christmas Eve. That family. Word travels fast in small towns. Ruth looked past Amanda into the house, where Sharon was feeding the children lunch. Margaret would have done the same thing. Opened her door. Saved whoever needed saving. She handed Amanda the casserole. I was wrong. About you. About this place. About what you're capable of. Ruth, let me finish. Her voice was gruff, but Amanda could hear the emotion underneath. Christopher is healing. He'll be okay. And when he's ready, he wants to come back and help, if you'll have him. Amanda didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. This is from Margaret's account. She left it with me years ago in case anyone from her family ever came home. I should have given it to you sooner, but I wasn't sure you'd stay. Inside the envelope was a check for $300. She would have wanted you to have it. She would have wanted you to fight. Amanda paid off the back taxes in March. $1,100 from the hidden room. Another $600 she'd earned over the winter, the $300 from Ruth. and a small loan from Sharon's bookkeeping work. The clerk at the county office stamped her receipt with something like surprise. Paid in full. You actually did it. I had help. Doris looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Just barely. Margaret would be proud. Amanda walked out of that office and stood in the spring sunshine and felt for the first time in her life like she might actually be okay. That feeling lasted about 3 weeks. Richard Walker's lawyer showed up on a Wednesday. He was a thin man in an expensive suit, completely wrong for the muddy road to her property. He handed Amanda a stack of papers and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're being served notice. Mr. Walker is asserting his legal right to the access road crossing his property. Amanda stared at the papers. What does that mean? It means the road you use to reach your farm crosses a section of land that Mr. Walker purchased in 1998. As the legal owner, he has the right to restrict access. Restrict access. The smile widened. Close the road, Miss Moore. You'll still own your property, of course. You just won't be able to get to it. Amanda and Sharon spent the next 3 days in the county records office pulling every document they could find. Sharon's bookkeeper eyes scanned for details Amanda might have missed. The lawyer wasn't lying. Richard Walker had purchased a narrow strip of land in 1998, right where the main road crossed onto Amanda's property. He'd never built on it, never used it, just owned it. Waiting. Why didn't he do this before? If he wanted the land so badly, why wait until now? Amanda thought about it. About Margaret living alone out here for decades. About the road that had always been open, that everyone had always used. Because my great-grandmother would have fought. She would have made noise, gotten lawyers involved, made his life difficult. And you, I'm 18 years old with no money and no connections. I'm supposed to be easy. Sharon's jaw tightened. Are you? Amanda looked at Michael, doing homework at the kitchen table. At Emily drawing pictures of chickens on scrap paper. At the house they'd fought to save. At the land her family had held for 70 years. No, I'm not. That night, Amanda read the letters, all 47 of them. Margaret had written them faithfully, one every few months, starting in 2000 and ending 3 days before she died. Each one began the same way, my dearest Catherine. Each one ended the same way, come home, please come home. In between she wrote about the farm, the weather, the neighbors who came and went, the way the fields looked in spring, when the grass turned green and wildflowers bloomed. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things you'd tell someone you loved if you thought they might never see them again. She wrote about her search, too. The letters she'd sent to every address she could find, the phone calls she'd made, the money she'd spent on a private investigator who took her savings and found nothing. She wrote about waiting. That was the part that broke Amanda. Page after page of waiting, watching the road, checking the mail, lying awake at night listening for footsteps that never came. I keep your room ready. The quilt your mother made is still on the bed. The books you loved are still on the shelf. Everything is here, Catherine. Everything is waiting. Margaret never knew about Amanda. Never knew Catherine had gotten pregnant, had given birth, had named her daughter after her own grandmother. Never knew Amanda existed, but she'd left everything she had for whoever came back, just in case, just in hope. Amanda pressed the last letter to her chest. The ink had faded. The paper was fragile as moth wings, but the words remained. Come home. Please come home. Margaret had waited 70 years for someone to come home. She died waiting. Amanda wasn't going to let that waiting be for nothing. The answer came from the last place Amanda expected. Christopher returned in April. His shoulder was still stiff, but he could work, and he brought someone with him. Kenneth Scott was 74 years old. He'd been a lawyer in Billings for 40 years before retiring to Briarwood to fish and read books and avoid people. He lived in a cabin by the river and came into town once a week for supplies. He also hated Richard Walker with a passion that bordered on legendary. 30 years ago, Walker bought out a ranch that had been in the same family for 5 generations, used legal tricks, buried them in paperwork. The father died of a heart attack a month later. The son moved away and never came back. Kenneth sat in a rocking chair on his porch, a fishing rod propped against the railing. I was the family's lawyer. I tried to help, but Walker had more money and more time. He wore them down. I'm sorry. So am I. Kenneth looked at her. But I've been waiting 30 years for a chance to do something about it. You just gave me one. He took the case for free. The court date was set for June. In the weeks leading up to it, Kenneth dug into every document, every record, every piece of paper that might be relevant. He found things even Ruth hadn't known about. He found the original homestead claim from 1923, the easement registration, surveys and maps, decades of county records, and he found something else. In 1998, Walker acquired that strip of land from your great-great-uncle, a man named Thomas Anderson. Amanda didn't know she had a great-great-uncle. He was Margaret's brother-in-law, married her sister who died young. Thomas stayed on the family property until he got sick in his 80s. Kenneth pulled out another document. According to the sale agreement, Thomas sold that strip for $200. But there's a problem. Thomas Anderson was diagnosed with dementia in 1996. By 1998, he wasn't legally competent to sign contracts. Amanda stared at him. The sale was fraudulent, potentially. It was never challenged because Thomas died 3 months later, and no one else knew the details. Kenneth smiled, a thin, sharp expression, until now. Kenneth found Mrs. Kowalski 3 days later. She was 82 years old, living in the same house she'd occupied since the 1960s, just down the road from what had been the Anderson farm. Her memory was sharp as cut glass. I knew Margaret well, used to walk over for coffee every Tuesday. And I remember Thomas. Poor man got sick with dementia in 96. By 98, he barely knew his own name, couldn't remember his daughter, thought his cat was still alive, even though it had died 2 years before. Mrs. Kowalski's hands shook as she poured tea. I saw Richard Walker at Thomas's house that year, saw him leave with papers. Thomas's hands were shaking when he signed. I don't think he understood what he was doing. Would you testify to that? Her jaw set. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Father Thomas Moore came to the farm on a Sunday. He was 65, a circuit preacher who'd served the Briarwood parish from 1995 to 2005. He'd heard about the case, heard Amanda was Margaret's great-granddaughter. I knew your great-grandmother. She came to services every Sunday when I was here. She was a good woman, a faithful woman. He paused, looking out across the fields. And I knew Catherine. Amanda's breath caught. You knew my mother. I saw her once, late one night in 1998. She was leaving town on a bus. She looked terrified. I asked if she needed help. She was crying. She just kept saying, "Tell Grandma I'm sorry. Tell her I'll come back when it's safe." Father Thomas looked at Amanda. I didn't understand then.
I asked what she meant by safe. She wouldn't say, just got on that bus and disappeared. His voice dropped. I should have done more, should have insisted. But I was young. I didn't understand what I was seeing. You couldn't have known. But I can help now. Kenneth built the case methodically. The homestead records, the easement registration proving public access, the evidence that Thomas Anderson hadn't been competent, the witness testimony. And then Amanda found the diary. She'd been going through the hidden room again, looking for anything Kenneth might use. Most of it she'd already cataloged. The money, the letters, the birthday cards. But she noticed something she'd missed before. The floor in the corner wasn't quite level. When she pressed on it, a section of brick shifted. Beneath it, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a leather journal. Catherine's handwriting filled the pages. The entries started in 1999. Catherine was 18. She wrote about leaving Briarwood, about being terrified but having no choice, about the threats Richard Walker had made if she told anyone what she knew, and she wrote about someone she called D. D said he'd come back for me. He promised we'd have a life together. He wants to marry me. He says once his service ends, we'll get our own place. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere safe. Amanda's hands trembled as she turned pages. Months of entries. Catherine falling in love. Making plans. Dreaming of a future. Then the last entry. Dated November 1999. Dee died in a training accident at Fort Lewis. They said it was quick. He never suffered, but I never got to tell him about the baby. I never got to tell him about Amanda. At the bottom of the page, in smaller letters, almost like Catherine couldn't bear to write it, Sergeant David Harris, 22 years old, the only man I ever loved, and now he's gone. Amanda sat in the hidden room for a long time, holding her mother's diary. All these years, she'd thought her father was unknown, anonymous, some mistake Catherine had made. But he hadn't been anonymous. He'd been David Harris, a soldier, 22 years old, and he'd died never knowing Amanda existed. She searched his name online that night, found military records, Sergeant David Harris, killed in a training accident at Fort Lewis, Washington, November 1999, survived by one sister, Linda Taylor. What nobody knew was that Catherine hadn't just lost her home. In 1998, she'd already lost the love of her life. She was pregnant alone and running from a man who wanted to destroy her family, and she died never knowing her daughter had people waiting for her. Amanda called Linda the next morning. Linda had moved to Billings, was living with her sister, working part-time at a grocery store. "Linda, it's Amanda. Amanda Moore." A pause. Then, "Oh, honey." I heard about the case, about Walker trying to close the road. I've been thinking about you. I need to ask you something.
Did you have a brother named David Silence on the other end? Then quietly, "Yes. He died in 99. Training accident. He was in the Army." Amanda's throat tightened. "He was my father." The sound Linda made was half sob, half gasp. What my mother was, Catherine Wright. She left a diary. She wrote about David, about how much she loved him, about how he died before she could tell him she was pregnant. Linda was crying now. "He told me about a girl, before he deployed, said he'd met someone special, was going to propose when he got back. He bought a ring. I still have it." Her voice broke. "I didn't know her name. I didn't know about you. All these years I had a niece, and I didn't know." Amanda pressed her palm against her eyes. "Can I meet you? Come to Billings, please. I want to know my brother's daughter." They met 3 days later at a coffee shop downtown. Linda brought a box. Inside was a photograph of David in uniform. Amanda saw her own eyes looking back at her, her own chin, the shape of her nose. You look just like him. Linda reached across the table and took Amanda's hand. I'm coming back to Briarwood. I'm reopening the diner, and I'm going to be there for you, the way David would have wanted. But Richard Walker wasn't finished. The deputy showed up at the farm on a Tuesday. Deputy Frank was in his 40s, a local man with apologetic eyes. Miss Moore, I'm sorry. There's been a complaint. Mr. Walker claims tools were stolen from his property shed, and a witness saw someone matching your description near his ranch 2 nights ago. I haven't been near his ranch. I've been here every night for weeks. Frank looked uncomfortable. I believe you, but I have to follow protocol. Do you mind if I look around? Sharon stepped forward. You have a warrant. No, ma'am, just asking. Amanda met Frank's eyes. Go ahead. I have nothing to hide. Frank searched the barn for 20 minutes, came up empty, apologized again, and left. But that night, Sharon was putting tools away in the truck when she found something. A small canvas bag wedged under the driver's seat. The label stitched on the side read, Walker Ranch, property of R. Walker. Sharon held it up, her face pale. He planted it. If that deputy had searched the truck instead of the barn, you'd be arrested, and I'd miss the court date. Amanda drove to Richard Walker's ranch the next morning, found him on his porch, coffee in hand, surveying his kingdom. She held up the tool bag. You dropped this. He didn't even blink. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, and so do I. But here's what you don't know. I'm not afraid of you. My mother was 17 and alone. I'm 18 and I have people who care about me. His smile was cold. We'll see how long that lasts. We'll see you in court. 3 days before the hearing, Richard made his move. He showed up at the farm with 2 ranch hands and a truck full of fence posts, started erecting signs along the road. Private property. No trespassing. You have 3 days to clear out. After the hearing, this road is closed. Amanda stood on the porch, Sharon and the children behind her. I'll see you in court. You think an old lawyer and an 18-year-old can beat me? I own half this county. But before Amanda could respond, Christopher appeared from inside the house, stood beside her without saying a word. A truck engine rumbled in the distance. Ruth's pickup came into view. She parked, climbed out slowly. She's not alone. Another vehicle. This one belonged to Robert Williams, an agricultural engineer from the state's Small Farm Assistance Program. We're here to assess the property for state grants. You can't close legal access to an active farm. Linda's car appeared next. She'd driven from Billings. I'm reopening my diner. Guess where my deliveries come through, Mrs. Kowalski, in her old sedan. I've lived here 60 years. That road's been public access my whole life. Pastor James Smith from the church in town. The council voted last night. We stand with this young woman. Richard Walker looked at the growing crowd. 8 people. Trucks blocking the road. His jaw worked. This isn't over. He left. But Amanda knew he was right. It wasn't over. The courtroom was small and hot in early June. Richard Walker sat on one side, surrounded by 4 lawyers in expensive suits. Amanda sat on the other, with Kenneth Scott in his rumpled blazer. The gallery was packed. Word had spread. Judge Patricia Reeves was 60 years old, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had no patience for games. Kenneth presented his case methodically. The homestead records from 1923, the easement registration proving public right of way. The medical diagnosis showing Thomas Anderson wasn't competent in 98. The fraudulent sale. Richard's lawyers objected, argued tried to introduce confusion, but Kenneth wasn't finished. Mrs. Kowalski took the stand. Her voice was steady despite her age. Thomas couldn't remember his own daughter's name by 98. I saw him try to feed his cat, but the cat had died 2 years before. When I saw Richard Walker leave that house with papers, I knew something was wrong. Father Thomas testified next. I saw Catherine Wright leaving town late one night in 98. She was 17, pregnant, terrified. She asked me to tell her grandmother she was sorry, that she'd come back when it was safe. I asked what she meant. She just cried and got on the bus. Deputy Frank took the stand, his voice reluctant but firm. I've been deputy here 15 years. I've seen a pattern. People who cross Richard Walker, bad things happen. I can't prove it. But I've investigated 3 accidents in 20 years. All involved people who had land disputes with Walker. I'm tired of looking the other way. Then Kenneth called his final witness, Sarah Walker. The courtroom went silent. Richard half stood from his chair. Sarah, sit down. Judge Reeves's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Walker, sit down. Sarah walked to the witness stand. Her hands trembled as she was sworn in. She looked at her husband once, then looked away. I found these in my husband's safe. She handed documents to the clerk. Drafts of the contract with Thomas Anderson, practice signatures, notes about Thomas's mental state, notes that called him a perfect target because no one would believe him. I've lived with this for years. The threats, the lies, watching people lose everything. I can't anymore. I won't. In 1998, a 17-year-old girl came to our house, Catherine Wright. She had a file, documents showing the fraud with Thomas Anderson's land. She was wrong, but she died never knowing it was safe to come home. How many people are running right now because someone powerful made them believe they had no choice? How often do we see someone struggling and assume they just didn't try hard enough, when the truth is someone broke them on purpose? The courtroom was silent, except for the ceiling fan turning overhead. Judge Reeves looked at Richard Walker for a long time. Her expression gave nothing away. I'm granting the motion. All evidence regarding the 1998 sale will be referred to the district attorney for investigation. Mr. Walker's claim to restrict access is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order. Mr. Walker is to stay 500 feet from Miss Moore and her property. The gavel came down like thunder. Richard Walker was indicted 3 months later. The investigation revealed a pattern stretching back decades. 12 fraudulent transactions in 25 years. Land acquired from elderly people with dementia, from poor families in desperate circumstances, from people too afraid to fight back. He didn't go to prison. He had good lawyers, money, connections, the kind of influence that bends justice without breaking it. But he lost everything else. His reputation in the county was destroyed. Business partners cut ties overnight. Banks called in loans they'd carried for years. People stopped coming to his ranch, stopped selling him supplies, stopped pretending they didn't know what he'd done. By the end of the year, Richard was forced to sell most of his ranch just to pay his debts. He left Briarwood in November, driving down the same road he'd tried to close. Amanda stood by her fence and watched him go. She didn't wave. Sarah Walker stayed. She came to the farm privately, eyes red from crying. I should have spoken up 20 years ago. I was a coward. Amanda didn't know what to say. Sarah pulled an envelope from her purse. $5,000. It's the least I can do. Maybe Someday you can forgive me. You spoke up when it mattered. That takes courage, too. The farm grew slowly after that. They planted vegetables in the spring, built chicken coops from salvaged lumber, repaired the fence lines that had fallen in Margaret's last years, added a room to the house so Michael and Emily didn't have to share anymore. Christopher came around more often. He helped with the heavy work, the things Amanda couldn't do alone. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. Some people communicate just fine without words. One afternoon, he handed her a small wooden box. "What's this? Open it." Inside was a sign. Hand-carved, the letters burned into the wood with careful precision. Anderson Farm, established 1923, for the gate, when you're ready. Amanda looked at him, at his quiet face and steady hands, at the way he'd been there, solid and sure every time she needed help. "Thank you," he shrugged. "It's just wood." It wasn't just wood. They both knew that, but neither said it out loud. Some things don't need to be said. In the spring of her 3rd year, Amanda opened the farm to others. It started small. A woman from town whose husband had died and who couldn't afford rent anymore. She stayed in the spare room for 6 weeks until she found her feet. Then a family passing through. Car broken down, no money for repairs. They stayed a month while Christopher and Robert fixed their engine. They helped with the planting in exchange. Then more. A mother with nowhere else to go. A teenager aging out of the foster system the way Amanda had. A veteran who couldn't sleep indoors but was willing to camp in the barn. Amanda never turned anyone away. "Why do you do it?" Sharon asked her once. They sat on the porch watching the sun go down over fields turning green with new wheat. Amanda thought about it, about the nights she'd spent in bus stations, the mornings she'd woken up cold and alone, the years she'd wandered looking for somewhere she belonged, because someone should have done it for me. And they didn't. But that doesn't mean I can't do it for someone else. Sharon nodded. She understood. They all understood. People in town started calling it the lighthouse sometime in the 2nd year. Amanda didn't know about it at first, but they'd noticed the light she kept burning in the window every night from dusk to dawn, the way travelers knew to look for it when they were lost, the way it became a landmark, a reference point, a promise. That's the lighthouse. You're almost there. Amanda thought about changing the name, putting up Kenneth's sign that said Anderson Farm, but in the end she left it. The lighthouse was what people needed it to be. A place where the light was always on. A place where you could come in from the cold. A place where someone would always answer the door. 3 years after she bought the farm, Amanda stood under the oak tree Margaret had planted. It was fall. The leaves were turning gold and red, dropping one by one onto the grass below. Behind her, the house stood solid and strong, its roof intact, its walls painted white, its windows glowing with light. In the distance, she could hear Emily laughing as she chased chickens across the yard. Michael was helping Sharon in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. Christopher's truck was parked by the barn, where he was working on something he wouldn't show her yet. As if he knew she was thinking about him, Christopher appeared in the barn doorway. He saw her standing under the oak tree and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back. 3 years ago, he'd been a stranger who helped her load tarps. Now he was something else, something she didn't have a word for yet. He walked toward her, slow and easy, the way he did everything. When he reached the tree, he stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You okay, yeah? Just thinking about everything, nothing. You..." He didn't answer, but she saw the corner of his mouth curve up slightly. "Ruth wants us for dinner Sunday. Pot roast. Us, that's what she said." Amanda looked at him, at the way the autumn light caught in his dark hair, at the steadiness in his eyes, the same steadiness that had been there from the very first day. "Us," he smiled, a real smile, the kind that changed his whole face. They stood there under the oak tree watching the leaves fall, not needing to say anything else. Amanda pulled the last letter from her pocket, the one she'd carried with her every day for 3 years. Margaret's words written to whoever might find this place. "Keep the light on, not for yourself, for whoever comes after you. We're never alone. Not really. The people who love us leave pieces of themselves behind, in the land, in the walls, in the light that burns in the window. Welcome home." Amanda looked up at the sky, at the clouds drifting overhead, at the geese flying south for the winter. "I'm home, Grandma, and I'm not going anywhere." But the story wasn't finished yet. The letter arrived 2 days later, official stationery from the Army Records Office at Fort Lewis. Amanda had written months ago asking for information about David Harris. She'd expected a form letter, maybe a copy of his service record. Instead, she got something else. "We found additional records. Sergeant Harris had one dependent listed at the time of his death, a son, born 1997. Mother Jessica Moore, deceased 2003. The child was placed in foster care. Name, James Harris. Last known location, Seattle, Washington." Amanda read it 3 times. Her hands were shaking. She had a brother. David had had a son before he met Catherine, a child who'd been lost in the foster system when his mother died. A child who was out there somewhere, alone, the way Amanda had been alone. She looked up at Sharon. "I need to go to Seattle. We'll watch the farm." Christopher appeared in the doorway. "I'll drive you," Ruth called that afternoon. "Find him. Bring him home." Amanda and Christopher drove to Seattle in early October. It took them 3 days to track down James Harris. He was 24 years old, working construction, living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. When he opened the door and saw Amanda, his eyes went wide. "You look like him, like the pictures they showed me. You're my brother." James had spent 20 years thinking he was alone, had aged out of the system at 18, had worked every job he could find just to survive. He'd never known his father had met someone else, had never known he had a sister. They sat in his tiny apartment, and Amanda told him everything about the farm, about Margaret, about Catherine and David, about the family they had both lost and the family they'd found. At the end, she handed him a photograph. David, in his uniform, smiling at the camera. "Come home." James looked at the photograph, then at Amanda. "I don't know where home is, neither did I, but I found it, and now it's yours too." 1 year later, Amanda stood in the field and watched the sun rise. She was 22 years old. The farm had 15 temporary residents. 8 families had come and gone, moving on to new lives. James lived in the room above the barn. He helped Christopher with construction projects, taught the younger kids how to build things with their hands. He'd spent 20 years alone, but he wasn't alone anymore. Emily, now 9 years old, gave tours to visitors. Michael, 13, ran the garden with Sharon. Ruth came every Sunday for dinner. Linda reopened her diner and made it profitable with Sharon's help. Kenneth stopped by weekly, teaching anyone who'd listen about property law and standing up for yourself. Robert Williams had helped them secure $50,000 in state grants for modernization. Solar panels on the barn roof, a new well with clean water, greenhouses for year-round growing. Amanda walked to the gate. Christopher's original sign was still there. But beneath it, a new sign, the lighthouse, all are welcome. She went inside to Margaret's room. The photographs on the wall had been joined by new ones, Sharon and her children, Christopher mid-laugh at something Emily said, James with his arm around Amanda, Linda behind the diner counter, Ruth in her feed store, Kenneth on his porch with his fishing rod, and in the center, 3 photographs in silver frames, Margaret, Catherine, David. Amanda placed fresh flowers in front of them, whispered, "We made it, all of us. This is where my story ends or maybe begins. 3 years ago, I bought 80 acres for $7. I was nobody with nothing. Today, I have everything that matters. I'm telling you this because I need you to remember something. You are not too broken. You are not too lost. Someone out there is waiting for you. Maybe they've been waiting for years, like Margaret waited. Maybe they're searching right now, like I searched. Your lighthouse is out there. Have you found yours? Or are you still looking? Tell me your story. And if this gave you even a spark of hope, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the light in the window, it's always on. You just have to look. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The fields turned gold, and in the window of the house that used to be called the coffin, a light burned steady through the morning. Not because it needed to, but because someone somewhere might be looking for a way home. And Amanda Moore would make sure they could find it.